Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
If we think about the consequences that we've all been living with, it's such a unique story, isn't it? You've got, on the one hand, it's about a company in distress. So far, so normal. But it's also about, we use its water. You got the boat race the other day where the rowers some of them were ill. They were told not to go in the water, which is very, very unusual. When I send my kids into the sea, I do wonder if they'll get sick. And I remember being in government and saying to someone, now 2 years ago, would you swim? And they said, I'd be very careful.
This is the thing. You've kind of got the public side of it, which is sewage and leaks and people literally having sewage spills in their kitchens and being told it's because they put nappies in the toilet and they don't even have children. And then you've got this
very complicated
financial structures and extremely complicated regulation because these are privatized monopolies.
From Bloomberg Studios in the heart of the Square Mile, this is In the City, our weekly look at the conversations motivating power brokers, policymakers and financiers the world over. I'm Allegra Stratton. Francine and Dave are both away on holiday this week. I'm not bitter. So I've instead asked my fellow associate editor and readout author, Ailbhe Ray, to make her podcast debut this morning. Ailbhe, you were writing yesterday. What did you do in the readout?
I did Rachel Reeves announcing how she's going to fund some of her manifesto pledges after Jeremy Hunt nicked their non-dom policy.
What's the answer?
Cracking down on tax dodgers is the plan. Whether that will actually work is less certain, but they're hoping that they can squeeze an extra $5 billion by doing that.
But both of us have written about Thames Water. I think I did it last week. Can't remember.
Yeah.
All merges into one.
I did it last
I've read
week.
your pieces too. So we're joined by Jess Shankelman, who is Bloomberg's guru on all things Thames Water. Jess, you were given the beat about 6 months ago when you came back from mat leave, weren't you?
Yes, came back from mat leave and was told, you're going to be covering Thames Water now. But prior to that, I was doing a lot on climate, which I still do when I have a second. And it was kind of a weird moment because I came back around August, September, and the crisis from last year, there's Thames Water crisis last year where they almost went into special administration, was subsiding. And I just thought it was really quiet. And Rachel Morrison, my boss, was saying, no, it's going to blow up again. It's going to blow up again.
So you didn't think it was a big assignment?
I was kind of like, I'm writing about oh my God, what's going on with these reservoirs in Oxfordshire? And and they kept talking about debt and gearing. And I was like, oh God, I don't know all this stuff. I'm used to writing about CO2. And then I sort of spent the last 6 months going to conferences and trying to embed myself in the water industry, which is very small. And there's a lot of revolving doors. Everyone's worked everywhere. And just trying to work out what is going to happen with Thames. At the end of November, my colleague Phil Aldrich wrote a story saying Kemble, which is the parent company of Thames, might run out of money, not run out of water. And lo and behold, they have.
So that was the key moment, November, 4 months ago.
Well,
five months ago.
It was the end of their annual report, which came late. And the auditors warned that there was a possibility they might run out of money in April, which is where we are.
So yes, give us the sort of most relevant aspects of the story.
Yeah, so just to go back a couple of days, that is what happened at the end of last week. Kemble effectively defaulted on its loans. So Kemble is the parent company of Thames Water. That doesn't mean that Thames has defaulted on its loans. Thames is still operating. We reported that Kemble's owners, that's 9 different shareholders of this company, which is basically an investment vehicle, begged Steve Barclay, the Environment Secretary, please step in and help with this process with the regulator. They're not giving us what we want. And he came back and said, no, this is not for me to deal with. So
It's a great scoop.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the government do not want to step in and have this on their hands. It's a massive debt pile that they have to deal with, if so.
And that's what our government team has really been reporting for the past few weeks, that Rishi Sunak just, wants to wash his hands of this. But until you reported that, Steve Barclay formally rejected this plea for help, I suppose it was just vibes that we were reporting.
Yes. So the government has updated its special administration legislation for water companies. So they did that at the beginning of this year. And basically, having done that, they hope to be able to sit back and just let this play out. If Thames was brought into special administration, it kind of creates like a pre-packaged, off-the-shelf model that you can then break them up and sell them if you need to. Whereas prior to that, it was all this kind of old 1990s legislation that made everything very complicated. So they've just got their ducks in a row.
But Jess, let's just look at that for a second. You said the government sort of wants to let this play out, but what does that actually mean?
At the moment, we are in the middle of a crucial point in the regulation process. Ofwat is the regulator. Every 5 years, every single water company has to say, this is our 5-year business plan of what we're going to do, the investments we're going to make. So at the moment, they are all trying to work out what they're going to do from 2025 to 2030. They put the business plans in at the end of last year, and Ofwat spends a year reviewing them. So this is really crucial at the moment because they're in negotiations, and that's what's been happening between Thames and Ofwat. And it's become very politicised because spool back to COVID, people started swimming in rivers. They realised that they were swimming in poo. Water companies were...
Which is shocking.
Yeah, water companies were told you have to make massive investments in stopping sewage spills and stopping leaks. And water companies were saying, but up until now, we've been told that the main focus has been to keep bills low. Which is still a focus, but you also have to now fix all the sewage spills and all the leaks. And Thames is appalling for sewage spills, and it has the worst leaks of all the water companies. The other thing that was happening was there was concerns about dividends, and Ofwat started cracking down on dividends. And Thames's whole business model is basically built on paying dividends to its parent company. And Ofwat has stopped that, which means that its parent company now has no source of income. So if we just go back to how this is going to play out, all of these negotiations that have been happening between Thames and Ofwat so far have been behind the scenes. And what's been announced is based on conversations that we don't really know the details of. But in June, Ofwat has to come out with its draft determinations on all the business plans. That's going to be the next sort of big moment for Thames. They have said, we're going to go back to our parent company at this stage and ask again, please, will you give us the money we need? So they need about 3 billion out to the end of 2030. But as it stands with Kemble defaulting on its loans, that's very unlikely. So then Chris Weston, the CEO, said, well, we might go to the market. So what does that mean? An IPO? Which, a lot of people have laughed at the idea of that. Thames would probably do very badly in an IPO, but listed water companies perform much, much better than all the other water companies that are run by private equity. There's so much more transparency and accountability, and you have kind of easier access to shareholders and investors if you did it that way. So that is a possible.
Sounds like you think that would be a good option.
I really don't know. I was talking to Dieter Helm on Friday about
an energy expert.
Yeah, and he thinks it's a good idea. But other people I spoke to, they just laughed in my face when I suggested it and said, no, it's like when was the last time? I was trying to think back. Was it when was the last time we had a big sort of IPO? Like, was it Royal Mail?
The company in crisis.
Yeah.
Ailbhe, how does that play out?
But people will always need water, which is why people have sort of like pension funds invest in it in the first place. So maybe in the longer term, Jess, do you think that could work?
Yeah, I wonder whether it could be quite bumpy to start. But as you say, that's the whole reason that people invested in water in the first place. And Thames Water is too big to fail at the moment. It could get broken up.
And we have heard
later.
that before.
Yeah. I think it's possible, and Thames have said, yeah, all options are on the table at the moment.
Thames wanted to put up bills by 40%. This is sort of where the latest crisis has come from. They had a 5-year plan to put up bills by 40% to pay off some of this debt, to invest in infrastructure. Can you take us through what has happened since and quite how dramatic things are at this point?
Thames has been asking Ofwat for leeway on a couple of things. And from my reporting, speaking to people on all sides of everything, there's a couple of things that Thames want. And I think it's very natural in this like extremely complicated environment for people to focus on bills. All the water companies want to put up bills, and Thames is looking to put up bills by 40% by the end of 2030. I think probably what's more significant is there's something called the WACC. So over the last 6 months, I've been doing a lot.
Learning about the WACC. Tell us about the WACC.
Jargon. WACC, the weighted cost of capital. And that's kind of really crucial to all these negotiations. So that says this is how much it's going to cost Thames Water to dig up the road outside of Bloomberg HQ to fix that leaky pipe. And Thames is saying, look, it's going to cost us £100 a day, obviously a lot more than that. And Ofwat is saying, well, Up in, another part of the country, it's costing Severn Trent only £70 a day. So I don't see why it should cost you any more. So Thames is saying, effectively it's London waiting, right? It costs more to do stuff in London because there's skyscrapers and a lot of people. And Ofwat's not bending on that. Ofwat's argument is this company has been financially engineered over the years. It's failing on sewage. It's failing on leakage. Why should we give this company any leeway? And Ofwat is fighting for its life as well. Ofwat needs to prove that it's cracking down.
So, Jess, what are the other options? We've sort of hinted at it, but how likely is it that the government steps in? And what are the other options on the table?
So as I think we sort of referenced earlier, the government wants this to play out. So I think this government does not want to step in. I mean, we've got an election in a couple of weeks' time, mayoral elections in London, and obviously Thames is the supplier of London Water. Then we've got a general election coming up, and they do not want to make this an election about water. Anyone who takes ownership of Thames, I mean, as far as I know, no one would buy Thames as it stands. But if, say, you decide to buy it for £1, you would then have to invest £3 billion in fixing chronic leaks, sewage spills, terrible customer service, everything. So the government does not want to spend £3 billion on sorting this out, particularly if you think about why they got into this mess. Is it really the responsibility of the taxpayer to fund that investment that should have been happening over the last decade or so?
Ailbhe, what's the Labour perspective on all of this? Clearly, Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, and Steve Barclay are wanting the company to sort this out. But this is a central issue for a possible next government if Labour win the next election.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially because it looks as though the government are hoping that they will be able to wash their hands of this. And Jess has reported that Thames should have enough money to last until next year. So they could just kick the can down the road. Labour would have to potentially step in and bail Thames out, essentially, which they desperately don't want to do. I think they're not saying terribly much about it, even off the record. I think that they are probably actually more aligned with the government on this than they would like to admit. If there are potential avenues for the government to never get involved, I think Labour would favour that.
Which is really interesting.
I was talking to an investor who was saying they're wondering the size of Labour's majority, because if they have a very large majority, Keir Starmer will be able to avoid special administration. But if they have a smaller majority, and John McDonnell and some of the sort of people on the hard left have been calling for nationalisation, it would be harder for him to avoid that.
Jess, you reported last week that Ofwat has to make a decision about whether to fine Thames for some of this mismanagement. And my read of that was that could be decisive in whether the government does need to step in sooner rather than later. What's happening with that fine? Would it change things?
Yeah, I think that has broader implications for the whole industry, really, because the way that a lot of these businesses are structured is you've got the utility, which is regulated and ring-fenced, paying dividends to the unregulated parent company to service the parent company's debt. And that is what Ofwat is not happy with. Ofwat is saying, particularly if you're a poorly performing company, you should not be paying dividends to service someone else's debt. All the money should be going to fixing sewage spills and leaks. And Thames was basically just the test case, because that rule was introduced around this time last year, and Thames was the first one to announce that it had paid the dividends. My question is whether this could have a domino effect, and when other companies start getting blocked from paying these dividends as well, their parent companies would also say that this structure is no longer sustainable.
Unless for all these big infrastructure upgrades that you can see across lots of different policy areas, private money will be needed. And is there a concern that the regulator may have gone too far the other way, and for private money around the world looking at the UK and thinking, do I invest in its utilities? Is that going to become too risky?
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I've just been told from sort of conversations with investors that the Treasury is quite worried about the signal this sends to investors globally. And I think the question is Thames a bad apple? Is it just a very, very badly run utility? Or is this the UK saying, we've got very complicated and difficult regulation and you shouldn't come here? I think it's probably the former. I think Thames has just been a right old mess. And Ofwat is in a very, very difficult situation politically. The investors have been very critical of Ofwat, but if you push them, they kind of admit that. Like, what else can they do? I think the noise around it makes this sector completely uninvestable at the moment. And that is something that really has to be tackled, because there's so much negativity in the media and around the politics of it that no one in their right mind would want to go near it.
So we haven't formally heard from Ofwat what it makes of Thames's plan, but we've had reporting that it doesn't support the current plans.
Yeah.
And then shareholders have said that Thames is uninvestable. They refuse to put the money in. And then last week, the parent company defaulted on its debt. So it seems like this crisis has ratcheted up quite a few notches.
Yes.
And
quite dramatically in the last 2 weeks. Yeah.
So what happens in the immediate term? Like, what should we look for next?
Who's going to blink? I think, is it a question, is this a game of brinkmanship? And I think that's what a lot of people think. That's a lot of the newspapers are reporting, that the parent company has said, like, we're not even waiting for Ofwat's official determination. We've had enough conversations with Ofwat to know that this is not going to work. This plan is uninvestable. And therefore, you deal with it. We're done. So, one option could be that one of the larger shareholders, say OMERS, which is the Canadian, or USS, says, okay, look, we've put all this money into Thames already. We still haven't got a penny out. Why don't we just gamble again? We'll put the 3 billion in and we'll wipe out all the other investors and we'll take this on. And eventually Thames will get turned around and we will make money. I don't know if that is going to happen, because having had conversations with people around this, it seems quite terminal. And the fact that Kemble has defaulted on its loans suggests that they really have thrown in the towel.
Jess, thank you so much for coming in and explaining all of this to us. It's murky business.
No worries, anytime.
I fear you'll be back quite soon.
Oh no, it's true. For the next year. This is a very slowly imploding company, I think it's.
Thanks for listening to this week's In the City from Bloomberg. This episode was hosted by me, Allegra Stratton, with Ailbhe, and it was produced by Summer Sadi. Additional editing by Blake Maples. Brendan Newnham is our executive producer. Sage Bauman is head of podcasts. And special thanks to Jess Shankelman. Please subscribe, rate and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.